Crunch culture. The grind. Whatever you want to call it, it's a big part of the world we live in today. It's the period of time right before a game releases when everything has to come together. So-called because months or even years worth of work can get crunched into a few weeks before the game comes out. Crunch is synonymous with overtime, coming in on weekends, and sleeping at the office if the need arises. Now, right out of the gate, let's make this clear. Crunch culture is not unique to the gaming industry. People everywhere have been asked to stay late to get a project done every now and then. But in gaming, periods of intense crunch are significantly more common, sometimes lasting for months at a time. In his book, Blood, Sweat, and Pixels, Jason Schreier describes the work environment at Naughty Dog, the creators of Uncharted and The Last of Us, saying it was normal for employees to, quote, work 12-hour days or longer, wear sick masks so they could continue working even with bad coughs, and describe the practice of hiring junior developers, quote, unlimited contracts so they wouldn't be eligible for bonuses or other perks, such as overtime and vacation pay. It was, and likely still is, a work environment where you'd get dirty looks from coworkers for leaving early, where the phrase team player was waved around like a sword, and where employee well-being was just not a concern. One good friend of mine was hospitalized due to overwork, reads a tweet from Jonathan Cooper, an ex-story animator who worked on The Last of Us Part 2. The gameplay animators crunched more than I've ever seen and required weeks of recovery afterwards. Naughty Dog threatened to withhold my final paycheck until I signed additional paperwork stating I wouldn't share their production practices. But stuff like this isn't unique to Naughty Dog. It's actually pretty standard as far as big AAA game developers go. One QA tester who was working on Call of Duty Black Ops 4 said, quote, panic attacks, burnout, dissociation. You feel like your boundaries are being violated. You lose all passion for what you're doing and forget why you're doing it in the first place. All management wanted was people who are disposable. They put contractors in a situation where if they don't do overtime, they know they're not coming back. An anonymous source from Epic Games said, recalling their time working on Fortnite. Employees would frequently find a private room in the office, shut the door, and just cry. BioWare, Anthem. The question is, how did we get to this point? There are laws against these kinds of things. Decades of workers' rights movements and unionization efforts. And yet, crunch culture remains an industry-wide phenomenon. It's clear that video game workers need some kind of protection. Protection from being overworked. Protection from loopholes in labor laws. Universal protection, like the kind you get with the sponsor of today's video, NordVPN. If you're still browsing the internet without Nord, it might be time to change that. They're the fastest VPN on the planet and are 100% privacy-oriented, so you can be sure that your web traffic won't be tracked or shared with anyone, ever. If you're worried about phishing, password attacks, malware, getting DDoSed, or any other security threats, Nord offers you the kind of protection you won't find anywhere else. As someone who had their email hacked in the last year, I personally wish I'd known about Nord earlier. Thankfully, we have an exclusive deal for you. You'll get 4 months extra of Nord totally free. Just click the link or use the code ACTION at checkout. It's risk-free with Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee, so what are you waiting for? Get protected now with NordVPN. Okay, where were we? Making games is really complicated. It requires dozens of different disciplines ranging from art, design, narrative, programming, audio, and more. Because of this complexity, there really isn't one single efficient way to make a game, so studio management styles vary wildly. Evan Wells, co-president of Naughty Dog, is one of the pioneers of the company's no producers rule, preferring that his workers not have their creativity stifled by what he calls a bureaucratic crutch. Game producers plan schedules, tasks, and deadlines. Most importantly, they decide what gets approved and what gets cut, all while keeping the studio's budget balanced. They're pretty important. Instead, Evan believes that everyone should be their own producers. He wants them to take ownership of the games they're making, to put in the hours because they believe in what they're doing, not because they're being told to. At a very surface level, it kind of makes sense. But when you dig into it a little more, you realize that at a big studio like Naughty Dog, it just creates an environment where people lack boundaries. New hires see senior developers working 12-hour days and feel like they need to do the same thing. They work the hours, they burn out, they get sick, and they leave the company altogether. Then, the next batch of new hires come in and do the exact same thing. After putting out Uncharted 4, 70% of the design team working on Naughty Dog's next game were new to the company. That means that Naughty Dog pushed their employees to such extremes that only 30% of the design team stuck around after. Clearly, something is fundamentally broken here. Regardless of crunch or a bad work environment, there's no reason that such a churn of developers should be happening in such a big and successful studio. But unfortunately, this is something we've seen happen time and time again, especially with these larger multi-year productions. Anthem, Cyberpunk 2077, Red Dead Redemption 2. All of these problems can, yes, be traced back to a lack of planning and empathy from those running the companies, likely due to the pressure of financial success. However, the nature of the video game genre could also be to blame. While a movie might have a set runtime of 2 hours, or a season of television X number of episodes, a video game is unique in that it can always be a little bit bigger. It can be hard to resist the temptation to add in an extra level or an extra item. But while doing so might initially appear quick and insignificant, it can cause a ripple effect that adds hours of extra tasks to everyone making the game. Artists need to make new assets, programmers need to fix new bugs, and designers need to make sure it's all balanced. Do this a few times, and you've just created one of game development's biggest enemies and crunch culture's best friend: scope creep. Star Citizen is a notorious example of scope creep. Cloud Imperium game CEO Chris Roberts' most famous previous work, Freelancer, suffered a 2-year delay due to the ambitious features he wanted to be developed. Ultimately, the game was released with his involvement being relegated to creative consultant, because he just wanted to keep adding new things, and it sparked rumors that the only way the game was able to ship was without his direct involvement. Freelancer was critically acclaimed, but it made it clear that sometimes visionaries need guardrails if their games are actually going to release. Today, Star Citizen remains a great example of this. It's been in development for 13 plus years, has very light release date commitments, and is one of the highest budget video games of all time. And still, the developers are forced to crunch. In late 2024, Roberts was adamant that they needed a playable demo for Squadron 42, a single-player story game set in the Star Citizen MMO universe, at CitizenCon 2024. So he forced his employees to work 7 days a week to get the job done, promising future days off when Squadron 42 finally released. A tough promise, given that Squadron 42 has been in perpetual development for more than 10 years. Ken Levine, known for the BioShock series, dealt with a similar but different kind of scope creep. When working on BioShock Infinite, rather than adding new features, Levine kept redoing parts of the game because he believed they could be done just a little bit better. This led to constant changes, leaving tons of content on the cutting room floor, even making previously released gameplay demos look like a completely different game. Perhaps this made for a better game in the end, but employees were crunching to redo work and make sure changes were implemented. Ultimately, the problem got so bad, upper management had to bring in a fixer to come and rein Levine in so they could actually get the game out the door. BioShock Infinite was a successful game, but also one that pushed its developers to the brink. Looking at these examples, it's easy to pin the blame on the ones in charge. After all, they're the decision makers. But this kind of desire for greatness is common everywhere in the gaming industry. Whether in design, gameplay, audio, or any other part of the production line, all developers want their art to be as good as it can be. In his book, John Statz, a level designer for World of Warcraft Classic, talks about the lead up to the game's release when he became obsessed with creating variations for caves. Eventually, producers had to step in and tell him it wasn't an important feature, and especially not one he should be spending company time on. However, out of sheer care for the end product and a love for level design, he and the producers came to a compromise. He would work on cave variations for the game only if he did so on his own time on the weekends, which he gladly did, crunching of his own accord just to get the end product a tiny bit better. This kind of passion is normal in the gaming industry. It's why indie devs manage to release full games while having day jobs. In larger studios, however, this kind of passion is taken advantage of, often to the extreme. Enter Leander Hasty. He was a game developer at an indie studio who is now out of a job because his studio got run out of town by a larger game company. Thankfully, Hasty received a job offer from EA. He attends the interview, things are going well, and then the interviewer asks him this question: would he be comfortable with working long hours? At the time, this didn't set off any alarm bells. It's the gaming industry. Everyone works long hours. So Hasty said yes and accepted the job. However, barely a week in, a manager came into the office and told everyone that their standard 8-hour, 5 days a week was officially being bumped up to 6 days a week. This crunch period, as the manager called it, wasn't supposed to last long, just enough to get the game into a good state. Then they could all return to their regular hours. They even put an end date on the calendar for when the crunch was supposed to end. So, Hasty continued working, being a team player and expecting things to taper off. But the date on the calendar came and went, and there were no signs of slowing down. In fact, their hours were getting bumped up. The current mandatory hours are 9 a.m. to 10 p.m., 7 days a week, with the occasional Saturday evening off for good behavior at 6:30 p.m. This averages out to an 85-hour work week. This was written by Hasty's wife, Erin Hoffman, in an anonymous open letter posted under the pseudonym EA Spouse. She describes how her husband developed chronic stomach problems and migraines, how employees at EA were having mental breakdowns and failing relationships, and how she would only get to see him for a half hour every day when she went to have dinner with him at the office. To top it all off, EA wasn't even paying them extra. No overtime, no compensation hours, no extra sick days. This EA spouse letter got picked up by major news outlets and made headlines around the world. Apparently, 80-hour work weeks with no overtime pay was seen as some sort of violation of international labor laws. Over the next 2 years, plaintiffs levied 2 class action lawsuits against EA, which cost the company around $30 million in overtime back pay and other fees. But it wasn't nearly enough. As much as we'd love to say that this open letter brought about some sweeping change in the gaming industry, that labor practices were followed to a T and everyone lived happily ever after, we wouldn't still be talking about it if it did. EA might have been annoyed by the $30 million slap on the wrist, which was a drop in the pond compared to the $2.5 billion they were raking in that year, but the crunch culture embodied by the worst company in America still lives on. In Hoffman's original letter from 2004, she named 3 other companies that she thought to be immune from this kind of corporate crunch: Blizzard, BioWare, and id. Ironically, in the 20 years since her letter came out, all 3 of these studios have been accused of putting their employees through similar crunches or worse. While the EA spouse debacle made its rounds and everyone was up in arms, the media attention slowly fizzled out and people kind of forgot about it. Several other similar stories started coming out, such as the Rockstar spouse letter in 2010, where wives of developers working at Rockstar San Diego claimed that, quote, managers are alleged to be dishonest about deadlines in order to push workers to the brink, bonuses would be revoked from employees failing to be team players, and 12-hour workdays 6 days a week was the norm. And yet, despite these detailed and verified accounts, nothing's really happened. Ben Sledge, in an article for The Gamer, said it best: nothing's changed in this industry. Devs still crunch to line executives' pockets. They develop chronic illnesses as a result of their passion for video games. That passion is weaponized, monetized, and they don't see a fraction of the profits, but shoulder all of the cost. So, what can be done? Well, there are those trying to fight back. The International Alliance of Theatrical Stage Employees, or the IATSE, is one of the unions that represents gaming industry employees around the world. They found that more than half of game studios, be they AAA, mobile, or independent, experienced some form of crunch in 2022 and 2023. According to the IATSE, the gaming industry is, quote, suspended in a parallel reality compared to other sectors of entertainment, where union representation is more common. They're basically talking about film and movies. This makes it incredibly easy for studios to take advantage of their employees, telling them things like they need to work extra hours or risk losing their job. A major reason for this is the gaming industry's relative youth. As we mentioned, stage, film, and television have all been around for over 100 years. And in that time, there have been labor disputes that have given those working in the field the ability to bargain for better working conditions. Video games are a much younger medium, and that relative youth has allowed workers in the field to be taken advantage of. For example, one popular way is to classify junior developers as contractors. In certain states, contractors don't have the same benefits as someone who works for the company. They don't have to be paid overtime, they don't get health benefits, and you can fire them on a moment's notice. Thankfully, there have been major efforts to reform the industry. In March 2025, the US and Canada launched United Video Game Workers, CWA Local 9433, an industry-wide video game union with the Communication Workers of America in partnership with the American Federation of Musicians. Tom Smith, the CWA's Senior Director of Organizing, said, quote, it's a cumulative effort by thousands of video game workers who have been fighting for years to redefine what it means to stand together and reclaim power in one of the largest and highest grossing industries on the globe. Representation for these workers is incredibly important. Bobby Kotick's Activision spent years busting unions and skirting full-time employee laws in California. Sega of America threatened to, quote, phase out half of the company's temp employees if they unionized. But these efforts have just slowed the inevitable. As wage gaps increase and companies continue to take more than their fair share, the unionization of workers like UVW is a huge win. Following Microsoft's acquisition of Activision Blizzard, Microsoft was forced to sign a neutrality deal with CWA, agreeing not to interfere with unionization effort. But while unions are a proven way to combat predatory practices carried out by the biggest companies in the world, they're not inherently perfect and take a lot of work to get implemented. But here's a question. What if we didn't need to police studios? What if they treated their employees well from the start? One of the Game of the Year contenders for 2025 is Hollow Knight Silksong, created by Team Cherry. Ari Gibson describes their development style as a, quote, controlled scope creep. Development started in 2019 as an expansion to the original game, but it kept getting bigger and bigger until it was clear that they were making a sequel. As the game grew, Team Cherry gave themselves the time to add new levels, mechanics, and bosses, and weren't afraid to delay the game if it meant preventing a crunch. At one point, Silksong was set to release in early 2023, but was delayed a full 2 years to add extra polish. According to William Pellin, there's a level of finish that has to be met throughout the entire game. But Team Cherry knows that that finish doesn't have to be the product of a frantic crunch. They were open about having enough money from Hollow Knight to slowly and steadily work on the game, and focus on enjoying the process of game making rather than chasing deadlines and revenue goals. The end result, after 7 years of development, is a game that feels utterly gripping from start to finish, and proves that there are other, more humane ways to make video games. Ultimately, not every studio has the luxury or the capital to spend 7 years developing a game. Many indie studios are on strict budgets and can't start recouping their losses until the game comes out. AAA studios have pressure from execs and shareholders, basically telling them that the game needs to do well or they'll be shut down. For a vast majority of projects, there is some level of franticness trying to get the game out in a timely manner. But that doesn't mean crunch culture needs to stick around. Planning through middle management, restraint, and, as Team Cherry puts it, controlled scope creep are all things that can help alleviate the stress of 80-hour work weeks. Not to mention unionization efforts around the world that have already yielded positive results. For now, the video game industry still feels like the Wild West, trying to find its footing and figure out clear rules of engagement when it comes down to the wire. But it's important to remember that the games you love are the result of thousands of hours of work by real human beings. Crunch culture in gaming is a deep-rooted issue that could take years, if not decades, to address. But empathy for the talented people working hard to create great games is a good first step.